we have an interesting tech corner today.
Yes, we do. About this little device. It's the X-Rite RM200QC. But before we get into that, companies spend a lot of money on developing their color. They'll spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to come up with their corporate color or the color for their packaging for a product or for the product itself, because they want that product to leap off the shelves, for instance, right? And so a lot of thought goes into color. Now, once you've defined that color, you want to make sure that color stays consistent from product to product, from year to year for the lifetime of the product, or if it's a corporate logo, you want it to last forever, right? Color is very important to the perception of a product or a company. So that's where these devices come in. They enable the person on the shop floor to make sure that the color that a product coming off the assembly line or a color swatch they're working with, maybe the color of fabric that they're going to use for a product, is consistent from lot to lot. Now, the way this product works, and we'll get into the details in just a little bit, is essentially you record a color standard, so you actually just use this to measure your standard, and then from there, that standard is stored, and then you can take it to your samples, and it compares the sample to the standard, and it gives you a pass-fail. It also gives you some details on the color space and the actual color attributes of the product that of the color that you've just measured. So let's show you how this works. First of all, come over here to the gauge cam, and if we get that centered on there. Okay, this is the front of the product, very small. Flip it over. I want to show you something interesting about the back. If we look up here where my thumb is, that's where the optics are, that's the business end, and this flap simply closes over it for storage. Now, the interesting thing is that the white swatch used for calibration is actually stored underneath this little lid, so that when we close this, it's actually ready for calibration. So you don't ever have to worry about losing the calibration swatch, of it getting dirty. It's nice and safe right here underneath the lid, ready to go. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to shut the device off, because I want to show you what happens when you power up. So first thing that happens, I power up, and it asks me in just a second here to calibrate. It requires calibration every time you power it up. It reminds you that the lid needs to be closed. That's what this message says here. I press my little trigger button, and now it takes maybe 10, 15 seconds to calibrate the device. Once it's calibrated, it's good to go, and we can start taking measurements. Now, what we're going to do first is we're going to record our standard. So I'm going to create a standard right from scratch, show you how easy it is. Just happen to have a yellow piece of Post-it note, so that is going to be our standard. Post-it note yellow is going to be our standard. So I'm in standard mode. I tell it that I want to edit this standard or create a standard, and I'm inside of it, and I'm going to take 3 measurements. There's my first measurement. Oh, and it reminded me, sorry, I was reading it told me that I didn't have my optics. I was still in calibration mode and my lid was still closed. So let's start from scratch then on this. Sorry about that. That's what little warning messages are all about. So we'll go back into edit mode on
Nice
this.
little functionality.
Nice
there.
little functionality there.
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready to go. So now we're going to take our measurements. There's our first measurement. Hey, no error message. There's our second measurement. And here is our third measurement. It will average those. And now, and here's some details on those measurements, what the color attributes actually are. And now our standard is there. All I have to do is save it, tell it yes, and our standard is good to go. Now we can go into measurement mode. One mouse click over, I'm ready to measure. Now what I can do is if I just measure this standard again, it should tell me that it passes. We would hope that it would pass since it's what I just measured. And sure enough, I get a nice little green check mark down there, which tells me I've passed. But let's compare it to a different yellow. I happen to have
a very close yellow.
A very close yellow. In fact, let me show you. Happen to have a book here. On your screen there, these yellows probably appear to be fairly close, and they are in fact fairly close. This one is my standard is a bit lighter yellow than the standard on this book, than the color on this book, but we'll just measure the one in this book just the same. So I come over here, and I'm ready to take my sample. I take my color, and sure enough, a big red X mark tells me that this sample failed. It also tells me how far off it was, and if I want, I can actually look at the color attributes of what I just took a picture of here, and it would tell me what the color actually is. Now, again, you can set the degree of error that you will accept. You can set your error band on this. So if you want, right now it's set to 1%, you can set it to higher, you can set it to lower. It's set to 1% by default, meaning that as long as I am within 1% of error, it will accept the color. If I'm outside of that, it won't accept it. I've played around with this. I've played with some color swatches, paint swatches from different manufacturers that look, I swear, look almost identical. And it will detect that there's a difference. Now I will say this is really used more for paint, fabric, plastic. It is not really intended for use on metallic. X-Rite has a different instrument for measuring, let's say, opalescent paints, metal flake paints. This really isn't an automobile paint measurement device. It's really intended more for flat, matte surfaces. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is you can hook this directly to certain printers, and you can print a report directly to a printer, or you can connect it to your computer, download all of your sample data. By the way, I believe this takes up to 300 samples. Download that into your computer, or you can download a PDF report direct to your computer and then, of course, email it out. The thing that is kind of slick, though, is that you can connect it directly to several different types of inkjet printers. Just press a button and it'll print a report right out to a printer, and you don't even need to have a computer on hand. So again, this is the X-Rite RM200QC from X-Rite. Cool little product, due out in September.